All right, friends and neighbors, welcome back. We are continuing our journey into Linux networking, and today we're going to talk a little bit about files, maybe just a little bit about package managers and if/IP, which is how we did it and now how we're going to do it when we configure our network interfaces. Sort of the first Linux operating system that I worked with was CentOS, so that is the one that I'm most familiar with. But these days I'm switching over to Ubuntu because of the support and the tie that it has to machine learning and some of the packages. There's a lot of builds for it. There's actually a lot of builds for every flavor of Linux out there, but the ones that I use are most often tied with Ubuntu. So I'll talk a little bit about that too. But at any rate, back in the day when we were configuring CentOS and we wanted to do manual configuration. Now, let me start by saying, whenever you're talking about nodes, right, most of the time you're going to be configuring things with DHCP. But when you want to configure a node manually, and here we'll talk about what, it doesn't really matter if it's a client or a server, you could go directly to the file and you can edit that file. And then to make the changes stick, you could just do an if down or an if up on the interface, and then you could check your configuration. But of course, today, particularly with the operating systems that I'm using, we don't use packages like if up or if down or Ifconfig or things of that sort anymore. We use IP. So IP is the way. But of course, if you still want to use them, if you're most familiar with them, you certainly can use them. And there's a project page I'll show you later on. So you can still go that way. But what we want to do is start getting familiar with IP. And there's a couple of tips and tricks, to get you started. So as I said, we want to learn how to use IP. But if you're an old guy like me, or you're, I don't know, maybe working with older distributions, or you just want to do it the way that you've always done it, you can install those maybe older tools because they're part of a package, they're part of a project called NetTools. Now, along the way here, what we want to remember is that there are a bunch of other tools that we might want to use. And if you're doing something like a minimal install, you might not have them, and so you might have to remember to install them. So the ones that I'm talking about, and specifically here, are things like traceroute, TCP dump, or Wireshark, tshark, and then maybe we want to remember NSLOOKUP and netstat. Now these all have different uses. Some of them overlap, right? So netstat does a lot of the things that some of the other information gathering tools or some of the status of your interface tools do. But of course, NSLOOKUP is a DNS tool that we use all the time, so you should get familiar with that. And traceroute is great for pathing. But without further ado, let's see if we can do this on an operating VM. So I got a couple of VMs running, and we'll just fool around with both of those. All right, hopefully the screen font is okay for you, but let me show you where I am. I'm going to do a pwd, so that's print working directory, and you can see that I am in etc sysconfig network scripts. Now, if I do an ls here, this is where all of the sort of client configuration files might be. You can see there's an awful lot of if up and if down sorts of things here. But if you look all the way over here, you can see that on the left-hand side, you can see there's the ifconfig-enp0s3 files. And these are the ones that you can reach out and touch depending on the distro that you're working with. And so I'm just going to do a more on ifconfig, and then we'll do the enps0s3. Oops. Spelling counts. Okay. Now, if you take a look here, we can see that we've got a boot proto that's static. And so I was manually configuring this. You can see that I put it on the 192.168.0.2 network. And so what I'm going to do is edit this to change it to make it DHCP, and then hopefully it'll pull an IP address from the hypervisor. So first of all, I'm going to change this. Now this is, the pretty standard way that we used to edit these. And I'm just going to eliminate these lines here, or at least the text. Now, if I wanted to, I could put a gateway line in here, things of that sort. But all that we really care about is that we want this thing to come up automatically. And let's see, on boot. This is the other one. On boot, we want to make sure that if the VM runs, that the interface comes up. Okay. So we're going to do this. Now, historically, I might have done something like this. I might have said if up, enp 0s3 like this. And we'll see what the IP address. Now, IP, I don't want to get ahead of myself, but IP is part of the default build in so many of these things. And you can see that it's still got this interface IP address. So what we do a lot of times is we will bring it down, and we'll do it, use the sudo here. Okay, there we go. And then we'll bring it back up again. And hopefully this will go out and read that file for us. And let's do the other command here. We'll do ifconfig. Okay, so this gives us an opportunity here because I wasn't sure if I had NetTools installed in this VM. But I'll use IPA again. We can see that the IP address is 10.02.15. Now, where did that address come from? It is from a DHCP server, that's clear. And in this case, my hypervisor is running the DHCP server for my NATed connection. So that's where that IP address comes from. We'll do a quick test to see if we have outside connectivity. All right, so we have outside connectivity. And that's because, right, this laptop is connected to my network and the VM is connected through the hypervisor through the laptop to the network. All right, so that's how we establish connectivity. And now we're going to install NetTools. Now let's do one more thing here. I'm going to try a command, and the command arp is not found. So one of the other things that we want to do when we're working with nodes, we've got all of these tools. Sometimes we want to look at the various tables. So I might do something like this, right? Netstat. Netstat is not installed either. So this was a minimal install. So there are all these tools that I might use to see what the status is with this node. Now I can also use IP. And this, I guess, underscores sort of the point of this video. There's all kinds of ways to do information gathering on nodes and across a network. The NetTools set of programs is a project that was run. They handled a lot of this information gathering for us, but now a lot of this is built into IPA. And so if I do something like this, okay, this tells me a little bit about my network and who my default route is. You can see that my default route is 10.0.2.2. So that means now, let's see if traceroute is installed. Okay, so traceroute is not installed either. So what we're going to do is see if we can't install these. Now, this is CentOS, and so what we want to use is yum. We'll go ahead and try and do some installs here. So I'm going to do a sudo yum install, and we'll do our first one, NetTools. Now this will resolve. Oh dear. There we go. Boy, it looks like it's going to fail, and then it takes off for me. It's going so fast through the screen. All right. So now if I use the basic tool that I wanted to use earlier, which was ifconfig, there we go. And you can see the formatting of this is a little bit different than IPA. I sort of prefer the way the old formatting was, but you can see there's a difference here because it's a different project. The authors of Ifconfig, or really the NetTools package, are different than the authors of IP. So what do we do today? Well, there are times that we still need to install stuff, right? Traceroute might not be there, capture software might not be there, but now today everything is sort of built into IPA. Now, when you're dealing with those clients, Windows, Apple, Linux, whatever it is, they're typically going to get their addresses via DHCP. Now, the IP address also will be followed with, or batched with DNS, any other servers that are out there, the gateway, the mask, all that stuff will come with DHCP, which means that really you don't have to do anything. Now, there are those occasions where you do mess with clients, but really, what we're talking about here and where we're going is the servers, or if we're using Linux as a networking device. What if we were going to use Linux as a router, or as a switch, or as a server? It's extraordinarily common when you're setting up a server that you do not do things via DHCP. Why would that be? Well, it is a resource that other nodes are trying to get to. And with DHCP, it is possible that you could get the wrong IP address, which means that nobody would be able to reach the service. So for that reason, it's very, very common for servers to be given static IP addresses. So the tool that we're trying to familiarize ourselves with is IP. Now, I've got a couple of the basic tools that we would use here. We're not going to do all of those today because I just realized the video is getting a little long. But, we've got the IP address that we might want to give ourselves. Now, I'll do the command, but let's take a quick look at it here. Obviously, we have the IP address add. There's the IP address and the /24. If you've looked at any of the videos, or if you're familiar with networking, you know that that is CIDR notation, classless interdomain routing notation, and that is the mask. In this case, we convert that to binary ones, and we would get 255, 255, 255, 0. And then, of course, the device is ENP, that should be 0S3. And then we might add a default route and then bring the interfaces up. Now, it's clunky, right? It's a lot more clunky than if up and if down. But we want to get used to it because there's a method to the madness here. All right, and then we can see, what we did with our work. So let's take a quick look at the Ubuntu server. All right, here we go. Hopefully you can see the font. Hopefully that's all right. Now, if I do an IPA, I can see that I'm 10.02.15. If I do IP address, I get the same thing because IPA is just short for IP address. I could do, let me see, IP address show, right? All of these are sort of the same sort of thing. Now let's say that I want to change this IP address. Now this is going to be DHCP, so we'll see how well the node wants to let go of this. But this is how we would do it if we were building this from scratch. And I won't do the shortcut so we can sort of see. Maybe we'll do this sudo IP address add, and we'll just try to make it something that's recognizable, something from the slides maybe. Now, what device is it going to be? Well, we can see right here it's EMP0S3, like that. Okay. Now, to get this to stick, maybe what we'll do is we'll say IP address set device EMP0S3 down. Oops. Good Lord. Not only did I fat finger things, I realized I'm using the wrong command here. It is the link, not the address that we're worried about. I might even put that wrong on the slide. So let's fix that, but there we go. Now we're going to bring it up, and we'll do an IPA here. There we go. So we can see that we've got this address that's changed here. Now the node itself, because it pulled DHCP, it's got this other address in here, and we would have to flush that out, but that's how we would set the IP address. But of course, what we realize now also is that where we're going is YAML. So these would be very nice to work with on the command line, and they're very handy for fixing things, for adjusting things. But what we want to remember is that with at least Ubuntu, we're going to be working with a configuration file that's written in YAML, or YAML ain't markup language, right? And then we would run our configuration tools to get that to stick. Now, once you're done fooling around with this, right, we know we can do IP address show dev enp 0s3, right? We could do the loopback. Oops, geez, I sometimes go between Cisco devices and these all the time. On a Cisco, it would be L0, but there we go. So you can do that. Do IP route show. Now, of course, if you get stuck in any of this stuff, right, we got to remember that the man page is out there. So just man IP or man Ifconfig, and then a lot of the options there. But if you get used to a couple of the basics, you're in good shape. Now, I suppose before we go here, I want to show you the last of the four numbers that we need. So when you are on a network, there's four numbers that we actually need to communicate, right? We need an IP address, we need a mask, we need a default gateway, and we've done those three so far, and we need DNS, which right now is being handled by the hypervisor, and so it's masking some things from us. But if we want to actually take a look at what's going on with our name server, there is a file that we can touch, and we just every once in a while want to remember that it's there. So that is etc resolve.config. And you can see that, well, my name server is on the 127 side, not exactly illuminating. And then I've got this search. So there's two things that a lot of times we put in resolve.config. One is the name of a name server, or the IP address of a name server. And then the other one is a domain, or the search order that you're going to use, so that when you get ready to do FQDNs, or fully qualified domain names, it makes it easier to search, or you can search just by the host name itself, and it makes it a little bit easier. So those are the things that go in resolve.config, and that is the fourth number that we need to configure a node on a network. Now, with Ubuntu Server, what they tell you right in the documentation is that you sometimes don't want to edit resolve.config directly. You certainly can when you're building servers and things like that. But sometimes we have to understand whether or not there's a process that touches the resolve.config file, in which case we want to put the name servers someplace else, like in a config file. All right, so I fixed this slide real quick, right? I forgot the keyword link the first time. And so there's really a couple things that you're dealing with, right? You're dealing with the IP address, configuring the IP address, and tying it to a device. You've got your default gateway. Then you've got bringing the link up or down to apply the interface, or apply the IP address to the interface. And then, of course, we talked about resolve.config. And I think I went over quickly how to take a look at your handiwork, right? There's a couple of ways to look at the configuration of the node using IP. And then, of course, how to look at the route, and then working with resolve.config. Now, I did a whole series of videos on DNS and how to work with NSLOOKUP and change the server when you want to query other servers that are out there, but there we go. Now, if I wanted to undo everything that I did in the video today, I would just do an IP address flush, and that will put it back to where it was when we started. Well, I hope this wasn't too confusing to help you along on your journey through Linux networking. This was command line configs for clients and servers. mostly clients today, right? Because we didn't get into anything crazy. So today we use IP, but my old faves and faves for a lot of folks are part of NetTools. And there's the project page for it. You can go out and see all the stuff that's out there. There's a project page and a man page for IP as well. But of course, we've got a whole bunch of other things to talk about, right? We've got bigger, badder server configs and YAML documents. What do we do when we're using Linux as a router or as a switch in addition to being a server? Whew. Well, that was a lot today. Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. Like and subscribe if I helped. And whether you're using old tools or the new tools, may those packets always reach their destination through the interfaces you've configured.